Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Bleed, Destroying Myths and Misogyny in Endometriosis Care by Tracey Lindeman, narrated by Courtney Patterson. Prologue. Anger can be power. Have you ever been told the pain you feel is imaginary? That the mental anguish you experience from being trapped in a cycle of feeling bad, then feeling bad about feeling bad, could be solved with a better attitude and a brisk walk? Or have you tried yoga, meditation, eating probiotic yogurt, drinking unicorn blood on a full moon? Perhaps you just need to get off your phone, get out into nature, get into woodworking, go on a vision quest, maybe learn to crochet or take up archery or create YouTube makeup tutorials. I hear Kegels help. Get that pelvic floor into fighting shape. When you have an invisible disease like endometriosis, you hear versions of this all the time. Your friends will tell you they get cramps too. Your partner will tell you to relax. Your doctor will suggest hormonal birth control to tame the pain and the bleeding. And then antidepressants to control the depressive side effects of the birth control. And then when your libido is sufficiently annihilated by the antidepressants, they will simply shrug and ask, "Have you tried losing weight?" This is death by a million paper cuts, little barbs of misogyny meant to undermine your suffering and shut you up. No one wants to hear about the feeling of daggers being plunged into your abdomen and twisted around. No one wants to know how sad, how lonely, how angry you are. Not only about being sick, but about how your doctors won't do more than the barest of minimums to help you be a little less sick. You are an island. There are, according to the World Health Organization, 190 million islands on this planet. People with endometriosis. The real figure is probably double that. About 10% of people assigned female at birth are said to experience the disease, and there are about 4 billion of us in the world. Some people don't know they have it. Others know they have it, but haven't persuaded the right people to give them a diagnosis. In North America, and much of the westernized world, people spend an average of 7 to 10 years trying to get properly diagnosed. Not 7 to 10 years from the onset of symptoms, but 7 to 10 years of actively and persistently lobbying doctors to try and figure out what's wrong with them. As such, the average age at diagnosis is somewhere around 28. So, what exactly is endometriosis? In the simplest of terms, it's a disease defined by the growth of endometrial-like tissue outside of the uterus. These growths, called endometriomas, lesions, and adhesions, attach to ovaries, fallopian tubes, and the exterior of the uterus, as well as the bowel and sometimes as far away as the kidneys, diaphragm, lungs, and in rare cases, the brain. For some people, it's as if a bottle of glue was poured into their abdomen. As the glue hardens, organs become stuck together. In an overwhelming majority of cases, the disease is marked by chronic pain and inflammation, infertility, and long, heavy menstrual periods. Migraines, digestion problems, and sexual dysfunction, including painful orgasms, are also common. Endometriosis can occur in anyone born with a uterus and in a microscopic handful of people born without one. There is no cure. Worse, there's not even scientific consensus on how it's caused or how it operates. That said, some researchers suspect the disease has genetic and epigenetic foundations, the latter meaning changes in gene functioning and expression that don't change our DNA sequence, with strong links to hormonal and autoimmune functioning. All this, and still endometriosis is overwhelmingly treated like a bad period. By the people in our lives, by the medical system that's meant to treat us, and by those who create the policies and laws that shape and perpetuate this misunderstanding. This isn't a coincidence. It is systemic disregard for our lives. Endometriosis was first described in literature nearly 4,000 years ago and was officially named in the mid-1920s. Birth control was first approved for the treatment of endometriosis in 1957. And, well, not much has happened since then when it comes to new treatments. We're told to take birth control and hope for the best. Or maybe get pregnant. I hear it's a cure. This inertia exists at the same time that mere fractions of per capita pennies are going to publicly funded endometriosis research, if a nation funds research on endo at all. Instead, the pharmaceutical industry has become both the biggest funder and the biggest profiteer of endo research. Drug makers are collectively raking in billions off the backs of desperate endometriosis patients, and too many physicians are allowing it to happen. Some are even enthusiastically enabling it by accepting consulting fees, travel, drinks, and dinner from drug companies, a widespread practice that has proven to influence the prescribing practices of doctors. Meanwhile, surgical experts and patient advocates are left to piss in the wind, trying to get medical colleges to recognize excision, not drugs, as the real gold standard of care. Endometriosis isn't the only disease that yields so much systemic mistreatment. Another tenth of people assigned female at birth have polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, a hormonal disorder that often causes pain and infertility. A quarter of us have pelvic floor disorders. 1 in 3 experience pain during penetrative sex. Did you know sex isn't supposed to hurt? Unless, of course, you want it to. There are so many of us, and yet patients feel alone, each of us toiling away in our own bubbles while trying to understand why no one seems to care. Even those who develop fatal diseases get alienated when those diseases are coded female. Cervical cancer is becoming increasingly common, killing 342,000 globally in 2020 alone. Mortality is highest in places with high poverty rates and insufficient screening for human papillomavirus, HPV, the viral infection known to cause cervical cancer that is most commonly transmitted through sex acts. Those locales include sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Americans living in high-poverty areas are twice as likely to die from cervical cancer than those in low-poverty areas. Even as a place where pap smears and HPV vaccines have been routinized, the U.S. is home to massive health inequities that worsen outcomes for a lot of people. For instance, white patients with cervical cancer have a 5-year survival rate of 71%, while black patients have a 58% rate. Rural black cervical cancer patients have even slimmer chances of surviving. Do the dismal math on all this, and it becomes clear we are being given care by a system that fundamentally does not care about us. That's not to say there aren't some very nice, very responsible, ethical doctors out there. There are. But they are operating within a system that is rotten to the core, and having good actors in a bad system is not good enough. Unfortunately, we can't dismantle systems merely by knowing how they work. Instead, we learn to circumvent them. So many people who've been through the medical wringer know this to be true, that systemic reform is a dream, and that making do is the reality. That's why we do our own research and become internet scientists, trying to make sense of academic journalese on endometriosis. As we search, we discover there's a community out there. Online groups and pages and endo-influencers and hashtags turning upwards of 400 million lonely islands into archipelagos, united in our grief and frustration, learning from each other what we haven't been taught by the medical system. This information is critical, and the method of delivery can reach populations who've been traditionally excluded from healthcare systems and movements. But there is also a lot of misinformation, hyperbole, and clickbait, and those thrive in the absence of effective, empathetic patient-doctor communication. This isn't only a physical disease. It's also a psychologically opportunistic one that preys on what makes us insecure, different, and disadvantaged, all of which are consequences of systemic and cultural forces pushing us to our limits. In this way, it's also a social disease. In Bleed, I've attempted to weave together the histories and modern realities of female subjugation, hysteria, and power imbalances in healthcare to show how the system came to be. There are no self-help tricks here. We have for too long carried the burden of helping ourselves because no one else will. Consider this an evidence file, proof that amid all the stories people love to hear about bootstrapping personal triumph over chronic illness, we are, in reality, set up to fail. Endometriosis is a disease almost exclusively affecting people assigned female at birth, including cisgender, non-binary, and trans people. Cis women, people whose gender corresponds to their sex at birth, are the vast majority of sufferers when it comes to numbers. Proportionally, though, some early research suggests trans men have a higher incidence rate of endo than cis women, and that gender-affirming care, including hormone replacement therapy, can affect the social and physical experience of the disease. Despite its cross-gender spectrum, endo is still largely considered to be a woman's disease, painted into a neglected, mistreated corner by the misogyny and homophobia and transphobia rampant in medicine and in larger society. That gets further compounded by layers of racism, classism, ableism, ageism, and the stigmatization of fatness and mental illness. Gender norms are entrenched in the language and beliefs around endometriosis, and we haven't yet figured out how to talk about the disease in an infallibly inclusive way. In fact, some cis patients assert ownership of endo by excluding trans and non-binary people from communities and conversations, as if inclusion demands giving up the meaning of their suffering. I get it. Endometriosis feels patently female to cis women, from the places in our bodies where we feel pain to the paternalism and patriarchal oppression we face when trying to access care. It is a disease associated with menstruation, a supposed beacon of femininity and womanhood. When we get our periods, we're taught that pain is intrinsic to the female experience and therefore doesn't matter. We know this to be true because the men and boys around us don't seem to face the same doubt and dismissal. Our periods become symbols of our alienation and oppression, and our communities are venues for resistance, of which some are extremely protective. What those people don't consider is that many young trans and non-binary people receive the same misogynistic messaging about suffering and self-worth, except for them, it comes with the aggravated assault of healthcare that doesn't know how to manage menstruation, endo, or other pelvic diseases without the systemic hatred of women. This is how so many trans and non-binary patients end up being treated as woman-adjacent, a reality that can cause people profound harm. With the view of gender as a binary, we've been tricked into the idea that women only exist as antonyms to men. This is why so much of female suffering is measured against the backdrop of male privilege. I've heard many people say, if cis men got endometriosis, it would already be cured. That may be true. We've certainly taken male sexual dysfunction seriously. Viagra has been on the market so long, its patent expired. And if there were any chronic pain conditions that exclusively affected cis men, we would probably take those more seriously too. Overall, though, the man versus woman argument is so tired. It presupposes that the only pain of consequence is that of cis men, when really, no one should have to live a life of suffering. And by playing into a gender binary, we also play into a series of binaries that falsely portray women as a monolith that is only treated differently in comparison to men, when in truth, each of us faces disparities in care based on who we are and what we look like. This is precisely why being willfully exclusionary harms us more than it helps us. Owning endometriosis is not a privilege. 4 millennia of awful medical care would suggest that designating endo a woman's disease has never helped anyone get better treatment. Instead, it's like being in a boat with a hole in it. The more people we have bailing us out, the greater chance that we all survive. To that end, Bleed includes some best practices laid out in the Trans Journalists Association Style Guide. Instead of using women as shorthand to refer to sufferers, I use endo patients and other similarly inclusive terms. I also use female/male and women/men when contextually appropriate, and sometimes I use assigned female at birth, shortened to AFAB. When I say we and us, I am talking about all endo patients, unless otherwise specified. Similarly, when I say women without a qualifier, I mean all women. Even with these guardrails, though, my execution of inclusion may not be flawless, and so I humbly ask for grace. In 1962, Dr. Robert W. Kistner, an endometriosis specialist who helped write the playbook on using hormonal birth control as an endo cure, wrote, "Endometriosis has been noted with increasing frequency during the past 2 decades. Several reports have indicated that it is found in 5 to 15% of pelvic operations. It is not frequent in the Negro and seems to be found most often among women of the higher socioeconomic groups. The median age is about 37 years, but about 15% of patients are under 30. It has been suggested that a specific body type and psychic demeanor are frequently found: mesomorphic but underweight, overanxious, intelligent, egocentric, and perfectionist. These characteristics represent a personality pattern in which marriage and childbearing are likely to be deferred and, therefore, predispose the woman to prolonged periods of uninterrupted ovulation." This passage is more than 60 years old, and yet the myths within it are relevant to the modern experience. Our genders, ethnicities, socioeconomic statuses and classes, body sizes, disabilities, and sexualities are used and abused to give us privileges and to discriminate against us. On top of that, actual physical symptoms of diseases like endometriosis vary in severity, meaning people's quality of life is unevenly affected. Hence, there is no single experience of the disease. We all face different barriers, which create strains of personalized oppression that influence our experiences. What I've faced as a straight, white, cis woman is just one version of the truth. To better represent our plural reality, Bleed includes the voices of people with different privileges and disadvantages to illustrate that there is no consistency in baseline medical care. Rather, it's meted out like Halloween candy based on how much we like someone's costume. Some may wonder why we put up with all this nonsense. To that I answer, do we really have a choice? We either live with it or stop living. Whenever we try to exercise choices about our own bodies, we are penalized by discrimination. Abortion? Don't be so promiscuous. Gender transition? You might change your mind. Having a child? Excellent! Unless, of course, you are too young, too old, too fat, too poor, too disabled, too black or brown. Not having a child? Well, then you're just selfish. Judgment of women who choose to be child-free is near to my heart, because I count myself among their ranks. I'm not talking about those who have difficulty conceiving, but women who could theoretically conceive if they wanted to, and who choose not to. We all have different motivations for making this choice, but whatever our reasoning, the result is usually the same. We get put dead last for endometriosis care because our plight is about pain, not reproduction. Challenges to bodily autonomy are outcroppings of white supremacist, paternalistic, patriarchal systems that are fueled by discrimination and the belief that women cannot be trusted to make decisions, especially not about sterilization, even if those decisions impact no one but them. The more discrimination we endure, the more we are told our bodies do not truly belong to us. The experience of gynecological illness follows suit. I went to the doctor's office because it feels like my abdomen is full of tiny knives, and all I got was this lousy birth control script. There's nothing wrong with you, we are told. Take 2 Advil and don't call me in the morning. This lack of concern has psychological effects, from internalized sexism to rumination to suicidality. It's easy to understand why some people turn away from the system entirely. My endometriosis story begins at the age of 11, when my period came crashing into my life. By 14, I was on the pill and taking prescription-strength naproxen to try to control it. I missed hundreds of days of school because of pain, bleeding, and anxiety. But then I learned to cope by being a high-functioning person. I didn't have time to be unwell. I went to university, where I worked 70 hours a week on top of being a full-time student. More than 15 years later, I'm still unpacking my relationship between productivity and denial. I spent a decade asking, pleading, crying for a total hysterectomy to help me manage extreme pain, both the physical experience and the psychological anguish of facing a life sentence of agony. I never wanted kids, so the hysterectomy felt like common sense to me. Yet the mere specter of change-your-mind-ism was enough to make my doctors back away and deny the operation. I lived my medical struggle relatively quietly, until recently. As a serious journalist writing about serious stuff, I had to ask myself how much I wanted people to know about my body. I felt weak for letting the pain reverberate throughout my life. For the longest time, it felt like if I opened the door and finally talked about it, my health problems would grow to define me. Worse, they could change how people see me. I could look crazy for taking on a system that society views as an altruistic force constructed for the good of mankind. But as a serious journalist, I also couldn't ignore the bigger story here. Endometriosis care is systemically flawed. Even with a few good actors, the system is rife with power trippers and gaslighters who lean on misogyny, consciously or otherwise, to deny us help and hope. I came to realize the only ones who benefited from my continued silence were the ones who silenced me in the first place by telling me what I felt wasn't real, that it was all in my head. And so the past few years have been a series of public coming outs. Coming out about endometriosis, coming out about a lifelong struggle with depression and anxiety, coming out about my anger. It has been revelatory. Not only am I learning just how profoundly all this has shaped me, but I am also learning that I am not alone. I am fighting for myself and for others so that together we can fight the machine that oppresses us. I have to admit that I was always a bit of an anti-authoritarian. Within the library's CD collection, I found punk rock. 2 big middle fingers pointed at everything I hated about this world. It framed my desire to fight for what I thought was right, a community that genuinely cares about the well-being of the people in it. I would flip open the inserts and pore over the lyrics, examining the musical missives about finding solidarity and fighting systems. I found enormous meaning in those liner notes. When I think about everything I've been through, a particular lyric comes to mind. It's from the Clash song Clamp Down off their 1979 London Calling album. Over a quick, punchy drum pattern just before the second verse kicks in, Joe Strummer and Mick Jones sing in unison, "Let fury have the hour, anger can be power. Do you know that you can use it?" That phrase has been flipping over in my head for the past couple of years. Anger can be power. So often we are told to lie back and take it. We must accept the things we cannot change, lest our anger consume us. But why not be consumed? There is a certain utility in consumption. When focused, anger can be a catalyst and an engine for change. The systems that oppress us benefit from our silence and compliance, and they make us complicit in our own abuse by forcing us to engage on their terms. Throughout Bleed, I've woven the history of our oppression and how the medical system, both as itself and as a proxy for society at large, benefits when it transforms us into helpless sufferers. To break the system, we first need to understand the forces shaping it. We need to demand change. We need to be angry. It seems to me the world has been afraid of female anger for a very long time and has invested incredible amounts of money and energy to coax us out of using it. Everything can be used except what is wasteful. You will need to remember this when you are accused of destruction, said the self-described black, lesbian, mother, warrior, and poet Audre Lorde in a keynote address at the 1981 National Women's Studies Association Conference. Every woman has a well-stocked arsenal of anger potentially useful against those oppressions, personal and institutional, which brought that anger into being. Focused with precision, it can become a powerful source of energy, serving progress and change. And when I speak of change, I do not mean a simple switch of positions or a temporary lessening of tensions, nor the ability to smile or feel good. I am speaking of a basic and radical alteration in those assumptions underlining our lives. Bleed is heavy and deals with a lot of things we don't often say out loud. It's difficult, but I promise you it's worth it. We deserve to be heard and to tell our stories without feeling like we have to protect other people from the truth. As sufferers of sick bodies and sick systems, it is easy to find ourselves in the high seas of hopelessness. Sometimes it takes everything we have just to keep our heads above water. But if this book makes you angry, I urge you to hold on to that feeling. Anger is a power plant that can generate energy that spurs us to action. You can use it to make a difference. If not for yourself, then for someone else. This is my difference. 1. What do I get? Navigating the healthcare minefield. The day before my appointment with the surgeon, I asked my boyfriend to write a letter attesting to our plans to never, ever procreate. Stunned, he squinted at me in a mix of confusion and incredulity. He knew me as a strong-willed woman, a take-no-shit kind of person. Why would I need his permission to do something to my own body? But he'd never seen me in a doctor's office. Within those confines, I instantly transformed into an anxious mess. He didn't know about my little black pocket notebook, the one I'd recently purchased so I could jot down all my medical talking points and requests. He'd never seen me dissociate by reading from it during doctor's appointments, or by taking copious notes in the sloppy cursive I'd honed over a few million lines of interview notes. He couldn't fathom just how awful my medical care had been, nor how it had conspired with visceral memories of childhood abandonment and violence to produce a form of complex post-traumatic stress that, in moments of vulnerability, often left me feeling powerless. He thought my preparedness was an exaggeration, but to me it was critical in case my mind went limp again under the mental strain of playing that tired game with doctors. You know the one, right? It's what happens when you want something they don't want to give you, so you find yourself negotiating, appealing, appeasing, trying to insist and argue while still deferring so that you're not sent home with nothing. By then, I'd been asking for a hysterectomy for 10 years, my fixation becoming more intense with each denial. He opened a blank document and began typing, "I have watched Tracey suffer for many years." "I don't need you to tell him how you've watched me suffer. I can do that," I snapped, bristling with nervous energy as I stood behind him, watching him hunt and peck at his slim white keyboard. "I don't know anything about this, doctor," I huffed. "But I know how the system works, and I don't want to hear your husband might want kids." He frowned at my impatience and looming presence. He was a prosaic writer, and his long, thin fingers typed so slowly. He fretted over his sentence transitions. Should this be a hence or a however? At my core, I understood. He wanted to help me by getting this right. Still, each blink of the stalled cursor twisted my anxiety into more knots. My shoulders curled inward, and the muscles surrounding my rib cage tightened, forcing my lungs to heave as I inhaled hard through my nose. My tongue spread itself firmly against the roof of my mouth. My jaw clenched. A high-pitched whine circled my brain, stuffing my ears with the sound of a million cicadas on a late summer's day. My gaze became unfocused and unblinking. That blank, hardened stare that could bore holes through the backs of people's skulls. The stare that washes over my face whenever I suddenly find myself in a situation I can no longer tolerate. Ah, yes, my old friend, fight or flight. The feeling of having no options. It presses the gas pedal on my sympathy.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?